let me tell you a little bit about Margarita. She studied at ETSAP, which is the Escuela Técnica Superior de Barcelona, which is the kind of technical school of Barcelona. It's one of the top schools in Spain, along with ETSAM, which is the equivalent in Madrid. She graduated around 1995, and along with his partner, Iñaki Alday, they established an office right away in 1996, an office Alday Jover that has become actually a very prolific office in the sense of their station. In other words, they have created a niche for their work, a very unique, singular niche, something we will learn about this evening. I don't want to take away all the surprises, but that niche basically deals with landscape, architecture, urbanism, and what they like to refer to as the greater territory that involves architecture. So their projects often are not just simply buildings, but buildings within this larger sort of context of the entire territory. In fact, two of their most recent projects, which have been won international competitions, one in Buenos Aires and one in Madrid. The one in Madrid is the Parque Metropolitano, which is a huge endeavor about a few kilometers north of Madrid, a major project that they won after an international competition, something that for us in the American audience is not as common, you know, because in Europe, competitions are really the way by which architects make their way in the world. Margarita and her partner, Iñaki Alday, have been in the United States for some time now. They both taught at University of Virginia in Charlottesville, and then made the decision to move to New Orleans, where they now have their practice, but their practice is a sort of bi-coastal practice, New Orleans and Barcelona, where they still remain as practitioners. More importantly, really, what I find intriguing about their work personally is their empathy for the residual aspects of these territories that surround practically every city on the planet. And I hope, I don't know what she has prepared for us tonight, but I hope she can hint at that or give us some insights as we live in a city of similar parameters, or I would say overwhelming edges that go on forever, as you know. But that's an introduction. I know that Igor was supposed to do this, but he left for a meeting. He couldn't be here, so he apologizes. So I have introduced her, and then Maggie will do the summary at the end, and then we'll have some questions. So please help me welcome Margarita Jover to rise, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Carlos. So let's see how that works back. Thank you all for coming and for being willing to listen to me and some of the work we've done at the office. Thank you, everyone from far and from close. Actually, Consul of Spain in Houston. Thank you. So thank you, Carlos, for the presentation, and thank you all for coming. So today, the plan is actually, I'm willing to, at the end, to discuss a little bit about what I'm putting forward as design innovation, which I would like you to think if it's really design innovation or not. We are seeing this idea of infrastructures that are cohabiting with floods, but also infrastructures of the 20th century of energy, et cetera, that are supposed to be integrated into the urban context. We work with this framework of innovation and would like to see if you think it's innovation or not. So I'm Margarita Jover, partner of and co-founder of aldayjover Architecture and Landscape. The office is most known, as just mentioned, for its work in a new approach to the relationship between cities and rivers, and focusing especially on the design of urban spaces of cohabitation between the dynamics of floods, that there is a scary thing typically, and public space. So the plan today is to share some of the themes worked at the office, and after a brief self-presentation of myself and the office, I'm going to share with you 5 projects. And I'm going to describe them through the main ideas that they are exploded, to then at the end have, as mentioned, this discussion. So the office was founded 25 years ago as a research-based office in Barcelona called Alday Jover, Architecture and Landscape. And as the office grew, we have now 2 partners that are 10 years younger than us. One is an architect and the other is a landscape architect in Barcelona, managing the everyday operation and continue to do work across between New Orleans and Barcelona. The office is small, it's a research-based, and it's 90% of the work the result of design competitions. So the 2 main areas of design research we like to recall is cities and rivers, where again, this intersection of floods and public space is the land of experimentation, and then cities and infrastructures where energy infrastructures such a power plant or an electrical substation, instead of being this kind of thing that is dumped in the backyard, is reframed and integrated into the urban context. Those are the 2 lines that I would like to recall today. So continuing with my self-presentation in this second slide, I just wanted to highlight from left to right the thread of interests that have marked this specific conception of socio-ecological urbanism that is defined in the book Ecologies of Prosperity that I co-edited with Alex Wall, who is now teaching at Harvard University as visiting professor of practice. The interest on urban issues at the intersection of water dynamics, cities and rivers in yellow, you see in the middle. Cities and rivers that are, again, these series of research studios that we organize at Tulane to deal with these spaces of cohabitation, especially in riverbanks, but also in waterfronts. And then also the last in the center, also the work I do organizing now a new program that is a dual interdisciplinary program in landscape engineering and so landscape architecture and water engineering together. That is something that we're launching next year. And then the work on collective housing that has to do with urbanism bottom-up, how to densify in a way that is from the territory, from people who inhabit the place and are able to develop the land, redevelop the land to densify and achieve more complexity with it. So this is the kind of map of interests in academia. And with that self-presentation, just to explain a little bit of also at Tulane University, the research studio we're doing now is this NAS Golf Research Studio that recently had a grant for. That's a $50,000 for this semester, and then we'll see next semester what we do, exploring, as you might have done several times being in this region, the regional scale investigation with the mandate to focus on oil, gas, legacy infrastructures, the community health and environmental challenges from Houston to Mobile. And then this is the first phase that we're doing this semester. We are studying energy systems, water systems, ecology, and urbanization models to come up with a series of strategies that you might be familiar with as you have worked in this territory for many times. We take this challenge on the lenses of design research and compare the region somehow with the North Sea in Europe, where there is a huge, really interesting project on the energy transition 2050 that is supported by laws and supported by the Paris Agreement of 2015. So this is a project done by a group of stakeholders, a public-private partnership led by a landscape architecture firm and many engineering firms that are collaborating across different countries. 7 countries that collaborate into this project of energy transition that is leading to a reduction of energy as well as a transition away from oil. With that in mind, the idea here is to start studying the scenarios of that regionalization of systems in the territory from Houston to Mobile. This is somehow the framework of interest between design research, urban issues, water issues, etc. So with that as a presentation, moving into the first project, the first out of 5, this is a fluvial waterfront recovery that is started in 1996 to 2001. It's the first project of the office. It had European Public Space Award, and it was exposed in Rotterdam Biennale, the Rotterdam that was called the Flood. And it was exposed because they, at that moment in time, in 2004, in the Netherlands, they were really interested in accommodating floods in the territory. And they saw this project that is accommodating floods at the scale of architecture. And they were intrigued in how that somehow was to be done and how that can be scaled up at the territorial scale. So that was the moment in which the Dutch started to study the room for the river, big operation that you have may heard that has taken out lands of agriculture to move them into floodable lands. So this project of transformation of the urban backyard of a town of 6,000 inhabitants into a waterfront allowed the town of Zuera to engage the river and its dynamics in a different way. So the area you see in the image as a construction material landfill inside the yellow line that was there before the project was done, all this was a giant backyard. And you can imagine garbage, washing machines, car wheels, all these things were there. And the city was, with a series constructing a series of facilities that were placed at the edge between the town and the river, served by this red line, this road, all these facilities that were the typical like slaughterhouse, police headquarters, fire station, high school, all these facilities were, you were entering from the red line and having the backyard to the river at the opposite side. So the project then started with the idea that the project began because an association of bullfights wanted just a bullfight arena in the town. So they typically were hiring, what you see there in the blue ring, a rented facility that you rent every summer to do the event. And they asked us to build a bullfight arena in the yellow space, in that space you see in this plaza. And we knew that we didn't know what to do, but we knew what not to do. So we knew that building a bullfight arena in this yellow circle will block the connection between the city and the river, the only open space that was left open. So we decided to transform the architectural project of a building into the recovery of a waterfront. So instead of having cash money into a pocket for a building, we said, okay, you pay us and we do a master plan for the whole region, and then we ask money to Europe, and then wait some time, move that to the regional government of the Watershed Institute, and then over time with 3 years, we achieved the funds to do the whole thing. And then we transformed the project of a building into a project of an amphitheater open to the floods of the river. But that meant changing the type of building that is, because a building cannot be flooded legally. So that's not anymore a bullfight arena, but an amphitheater in the park that now seasonally is used as a bullfight, but also used for some other things. So that it was a process of 5 years that took us to reframe the question to be able to move that forward. So that is somehow the loop that we fight for, so that this is the construction of a waterfront, a new facility, and then a plaza. And then, of course, the sequence of seasonal floods that was designed working with microtopography and drainage. The 3 plans above are the floodscapes of existing condition, and the 3 plans below are the floods of microtopography with the project in it. So topography and architecture are tightly associated, and the way that can be flooded is because the opposite side of the river has a certain level from which the water goes to the other side instead of to the building, right? So it's a work of sectional floodability. So the river dynamics of the Gaia River are observed and understood as positive agent, and then these series of waters are fertilizing the riparian forest and maintaining it. Maintenance is critically important for all the cities that want to have green infrastructures that are for free. So the point is to open up floodability for that to happen. The project is one of public space, landscape engineering, architecture, and urbanism in a continuous manner. So above you see the section with types of different terraces in gray color. On top, number 1, number 2, number 3. Number 2 is where the bullfight is located, and number 3 is the floodable zone. Of course, in the lower terrace, there's also a series of drains perpendicular to the river that are traced and retraced, and the microtopography allowed the drainage to perform and to flood and unflood in a productive way. There's also green filters along these channels that allow the reduction of energy of floods and the catch of sediments. And the bullfight arena is an amphitheater placed at the park with more than one function. Of course, it works as a bullfight, as you can see in the image, and it's separated from the typical typology of a closed ring with facades. So instead of an amphitheater that performs different, it's an amphitheater that performs different programs seasonally, and in the fall and spring it gets flooded. And of course, in summer is a receptacle of corridas. So looking at architecture as part of the territory means to understand well urban issues, topography, drainage, water cycle, to place that piece in a specific way, in specific positions. So that drove the project. The second one is Zaragoza Metropolitan Water Park. We keep working with floodable spaces. That was the first project where we tested, and then we became interested in what is that of public space that can be flooded and how that can be flooded. So in this project, we worked with, again, the same idea of flooding pieces of park, but also flooding from the ground up. The idea of permeable soil and how this, and also testing even like how buildings can be in floodable zones. So that was a little bit of a step further in that direction. So the Metropolitan Water Park in Zaragoza was built for the International Exposition of 2008. That is an international competition we won in 2004, 4 years to do that. I always try to put the millimeters of rain here, and of course the consciousness that it's really little rain what we have in these places that we have worked. So meaning that the landscape somehow needs to come from floods, because for rain only sometimes it's difficult. So the water park is located in Zaragoza, a city of 700,000 inhabitants. That is just in the middle of this big agricultural infrastructure that was founded by Roman Empire. It was called Caesar Augusta, and that since then it has successively rebuilt at higher levels to accommodate water dynamics and floods historically. The city is at the river banks of the Ebro River, the most with more flow in Spain, and in this rich agricultural context. The water park, it's also the new Western Metropolitan Park of the city of Zaragoza, you see here in the west. It's part of this big planning strategy of having 4 metropolitan parks in the cardinal points of the city. And it was proposed as part of a candidacy for the 2008 exposition of international exposition. As you know, we have universal expositions that are 6 months long, and then international expositions that are 3 months long. So that is the second category, is 3 months. And these typical expositions are thematic, so that the theme was water and sustainable development, and the precinct of the expo is always constrained by rules and is 25 hectares. So that piece was the main expenses of the government and regional government to get this done. But at the same time that the national and regional governments were investing in this precinct expo, they were also investing into this metropolitan park that was then for the city as a whole in the future. So this is the plan that the city came up with to apply for this candidacy. And not only the water park came with the expo, but also all the recovery of the river banks along the whole city of Zaragoza, recovering public spaces, doing a lot of competitions of different zones, etc. during 5 years. So we won this international competition of this big part. Here you see the future Zaha Hadid bridge pavilion, and several pieces of well-known architecture are spread all of this space. So the 300 acres metropolitan water park has several buildings inside that deal with seasonal floods in different ways. The park itself acts as an infrastructure to laminate floods, as we'll see in a moment, and to reduce the energy of floods before waters go downstream towards the city. So the park acts as a lamination infrastructure, as a green infrastructure to reduce the energy before it moves through the city. So that was one of the ambitions of the park. It's also a space of water quality improvement that is a green infrastructure that runs through it, and it's also a space that hosts floods from the groundwater table up, because the whole work of permeability was really a fight against compaction, against impermeable surfaces, etc., to be able to accommodate these floods seasonally. So the water park then is in a geographical context into this big watershed that has, as mentioned, lamination as one big idea of floods, water quality improvement, second one, infiltration architecture, infiltration from the ground up, and then architecture cohabitation. In terms of lamination, the first action is to turn down dikes that were in the perimeter of this meander. You see this red line here that is existing, and then proposed, you see that is turned down. There are some others here that were also disappearing, but at the same time, we were strengthening this one inside and closing it towards the highway somehow, or the boulevard, to have this core inside floodable only from bottom up, while the exterior was planted with thousands of trees and was allowed to flood. So that lamination needed, as mentioned, a lot of trees. So that the first phase from 2004 to 2005 was this big planting strategy that allows the flows of floods to accommodate before getting through the city. So lamination is the first big move, and increasing lands to be flooded. So that is a scary image of the construction moment, where the hydraulic infrastructures between the floodable area and the inside of the park were not built. So you see brown waters, not only outside this perimeter here, brown waters here that are supposed to be there, but you also see brown waters inside because these hydraulic waters were not built. But you can also see transparent waters on this area. That is precisely what we wanted, is this water table to raise up and accommodate into the park and fertilize and irrigate and etc. So that is what happened some years later in 2015. You see, so that one was 2007 in construction before 2008, and that's one. This one here, 2015, with these cubic meters per second. You see the brown outside the main dike, and you see inside how it is flooded by the groundwater table from the bottom. So thousands of trees on the perimeters, they are meant to laminate the energy and to catch sediments. And it's interesting formally, what is the form about? What is the park? What is the design? So park we understand parks as landscapes. You can say that's banal, maybe. But for us, all landscapes are the result of a relationship between the territory and the society who inhabits it. Meaning that when looking at the environment, the traces and forms, you can see that the park inherits are the geometry of microtopography of a place and the agricultural society that decided to transform this meander from a forested land to an agricultural one, working all this microtopography and working a series of channels of irrigation that you see in the meander, that are canals that work by gravity to irrigate all these lands. There's this association of water management that belong to the watershed that is organized by community of irrigators, regantes, that they control the amount of water that goes into this left image, no? to irrigate this land. So that's an artificial man-made infrastructure that we transform to the right to a new green infrastructure that has the purpose of improving the quality of water from the river. So you catch water from the river upstream, here have a decantation, an improvement of the quality with wetlands, and then this water goes directly to a bath that is at the end of it, where you see several pieces of architecture, but also baths that are made with like the natural improved water quality waters on the space. So the idea of improving water through public space instead of a kidney or an infrastructure or a building or a single function is something that we're interested in. So that makes the inside of the park populated by this water infrastructure for both bathing and also navigation with canals. But then the third idea is, if lamination is the first and the water quality is the second one, the third one, as mentioned, is the lamination, or the infiltration from the ground up. Here you see the inside of the meander with these paths here with 4 inches of water on top. It's a transparent water that has raised its level above. And this covers the path or the level. But because the cut and fill strategy, there are paths that are elevated that keep the park functioning despite this floodability of the public space. So then in terms of the third idea of this water park is the architecture and the strategies for cohabitation in architecture. We have different buildings in this park. In the northern park, you see the power plant that is this district heating and cooling infrastructure, electrical substation, and a video art center that is supposed to be at the interface between the citizens and the infrastructure. And then below you see another type of building that is to the south that gets more exposed to flooding. Is worked with textile and vegetation on top. That's the bath pavilions that have a strategy of a big hangar that is vegetated and then boxes inside that can change over time their program. That's the pavilions of the water park. And then the other piece of architecture within this water park is, as I mentioned, the power plant. It can be visited inside, so it's accessible by citizens, but it's also an infrastructure of a video art center. It has a collection of video arts, and this one in specifically is called Exchange, and it's done by Eulalia Baidosera, and it's a piece that is meant when the power plant produces heat, it has a clip and makes this performance of a video art, and then when it's cold, generating cold, it has another clip that generates. So the obsession was that how can architecture show that it's sweating, or show that it's like having like a type of performance specific to be shown didactically to the neighborhood. And then the third building strategy is this theater that is also located on the water park and is like a boat that has levels of floats and accommodates the floats in a different way. It's the Arbole Theater. So with this Zaragoza Metropolitan Park, there's this series of accommodation of floats in different ways through the space, but also through the way architecture is constructed. So the next one, which is perhaps shorter, is that the tramway line integration. So with this idea of integration infrastructures of water, we are also interested in integration of mobility, thinking that mobility, instead of being separated with single use, let's say cars and then bikes and trains in a single space, we tend to rebalance mobility, reducing the importance of cars, increasing the importance of pedestrians and bikes, and also tramways, and trying them to cohabit in the same platform. So that is the ultimate kind of philosophy and goal of this first line of tramway in Zaragoza, which is coming north-south. Zaragoza was a city of buses and cars, and with this aim to enter into the reduction of CO2 in Europe in general, there's a lot of movement in municipalities and regional governments to apply for funds or to move towards slow mobility, to move towards reduction of emissions of CO2, etc. And this is within this strategy. So, and that these competitions are open for that. So we're testing here a transformation of a city that was car-centered into one that is also with cars, but with other modes of transportation. So it's about integration of modes. And the integration means that in this case, this is the main plaza to the city center. You see the tramway, you see pedestrians crossing and bike lanes, and of course a lot of mini signals of rules that needs to be relearned by people, how to move and how to navigate the space, new types of lighting that makes the regulation of that more sophisticated, and you need to build a culture, a new culture of circulating in the city. So that project won, of course, afforded universal access and won the National Prize for Blind Citizens, because it's also organized in a way the contrast of pavements is and the textures is organized so you can move, if you're blind, through the city to all this project. So that is what was before. As many cities, we have moved from this space dominated by cars and also dominated full of visual and physical barriers for pedestrians. This was before, with like barricades of spaces that were protecting pedestrians from car traffic. So from that, we moved into this kind of seamless surface that is designed with different textures and pavements. So from facade to facade, to allow this cohabitation strategy. And of course, the design of tramway stops that are trying to contain all the debris that you find typically in public spaces, from garbage bins to Muppets and all this kind of debris. So compacted into this tramway stop to clean the space. That's another strategy. With a green grass roof. But the section is, again, this thing about eliminating, with an intensive work on microtopography, eliminating topographical barriers, but also working extensively into the design of every stone in the ground, the texture of the stone, the materiality, the granite, the wood, the different vegetation parterres that has an extremely high level of precision, similar to what is a floor plan in a house, in a way that is design, over-design perhaps, but really design and that level of care. That is this scale of 1 to 50, that is like, including, so that is a disciplinary project with some licenses for playgrounds and microtopographies, etc. So the following one is the Madrid Metropolitan Forest that is part, again, of a big strategy for the green belt in the city. And this is, again, really little rainfall. So the Madrid green belt is a project you see in the red rectangle, is one of, in the red square is the competition we won, but the green belt is formed by several competitions around. So, and the idea is that there are already these many big parks already exist. So it's about completing the patches in between the existing green to achieve this consciousness of a green belt by the citizens of the city. So this is, the project is elaborated on the competition phase with a team of specialists that we always work with. So what is good about these specialists is that they know well their field, but at the same time, they also have enough awareness of themselves to see that things cannot be done as usual. So that's really interesting when you have a specialist that it's aware of its limitations, or it's the limitation of its solutions for certain case studies. So that is really interesting because you learn a lot from them. So that it's this team. So the Metropolitan Park of Madrid is part of a cultural ambition of the city to establish a forestal green belt of 75 kilometers that surrounds the city and aims to have 32,000 hectares of green space with new, as you see, already existing, but with new 4,000 hectares and 1 million trees. So what is interesting about perhaps this slide is the fact that the framework is already established by the strategic project department of a city. So the city has a strategic department on urban projects, and they are aiming to achieve that through their organization and ambition in connection with Europe, and then they launch different competitions for the different pieces. So we have that within this idea of improving the city of Madrid for climate change. There's this series of maps on diagnosis of the city. So for example, this is the heat island effect with the Madrid temperature increase and the fact that, of course, Spain is in the path of desertization, so it's getting more and more dry, and so the cities are becoming aware of that and trying to prepare themselves with green, blue infrastructures and forestation to get ready for that challenge. So a bit of basic geography here. In red, you see Madrid, the city of Madrid. Yeah, boom, in the middle. But then in yellow, that traverses this red thing is the river, the Manzanares River that crosses it, but it crosses it as a channel, like the typical concrete channel, like really piped, etc. Recently, it has this Madrid-Rio project that was opening up the river, but also conditioning the river as a whole. But then this river, it's connecting the north and the south green spaces, but from that, the idea is to build other green spaces around the city. This green belt that already exists. So if we zoom in to the reddish zone that is now in white perimeter, we see the different 5 pieces of this future green belt. The competition brief asked for the strategies of transformation of each zone of these ones. We won the zone number 4, but the different zones, number 1 has a strategy of an agroforestal matrix that connects the mountain to the north of Pardo with the city through, there's an agricultural big infrastructure, so the idea is to have a green agroforestry matrix with forests that cross the fields and connect the city with this space and with the Sierra. The second zone is connecting existing parks, the blue one that exists. The third one is connecting the open spaces between new developments of city. And the fourth one, which is ours, is just in the place of the intersection of a green belt and the river. So that is what we're going to just see. So this is this zone 4. This zone 4 is a mess because it's the south, is the poorest zone of the city. It's a place where there's 3 sewer treatment plants, landfill, train infrastructures that are entering, and then highways. So it's really a disconnected territory, fractions, but infrastructure, and with lower income and lower services. So that's this giant area that has degraded riparian environment constrained by the city and the flood protection dikes. So as you can imagine, this kind of large-scale project, you cannot lead that with one idea or one project. So we are launching 8 ideas for the transformation of that. The first one, which is where we are now obsessed about, because it's where innovation from our point of view can happen, which is this sewer treatment plant that will become springs of fresh water. Because cities that, like Madrid, that have 400 millimeters is really little rain, and the river has not a lot of water. So the hypothesis here is that because cities drink a lot of water, all this is a resource that we can use through the sewer treatment plant and the reclamation of water that goes out of it. No? So that instead of throwing back to the river, part of it needs to go to the river for ecological purposes, but part of it can be regenerated for the creation of a civic space, a civic infrastructure that can be like a hypostyle room and like a Alhambra Granada infrastructure that plays with water, with fresh water, and can be the entrance of citizens, a connection between the neighborhood and the river behind. No? This space, this artificial waterscape that is a spring. So that is our architectural ambition, trying to move the archetype of the sewer treatment plant into a new archetype that can be this civic infrastructure that is at the front of the neighborhood. So that is one of one idea out of 8. So that means studying well the cycle of recycling and modernizing the system of treatment to make it more compact and more efficient, and then reusing the left over spaces, retrofitting all the infrastructures to become part of this kind of rings, donuts, and all that needs to become retrofitted to be a civic infrastructure open to the neighborhood. The second idea is, of course, this is at the south of the city, and from the river down, there is a huge agrarian park that is the Manzanares. It was the basket of the city, agricultural basket of the city. So that the zone where we are is the tip of the iceberg of this green infrastructure. So we aim to recover some of these orchards that citizens can use and apply for orchards of agricultural use, but also increasing floodability. That's the second idea. So then it's a retrofitting of old buildings, new buildings that will serve the purpose of animating this place as an agrarian park. The third idea is that it's a place full of archaeological remains, not only the frontier in the civil war between one place and one bound and the other one, but also the place of a huge, really interesting canal, that these 17th century canals for navigation that were built for in stone and really precious, that can be retrofitted and reused as low mobility path, etc. So that's the third idea. The fourth one is that there's also a cattle trail of slow mobility that traverses east-west. You see that is that migration path you see in this map of Spain, that ships were moving from north Spain to south, to like in the cowboys here, I think the States, no? Moving from up. They were traversing this path that will be part of this green belt infrastructure. So reusing, retrofitting that as part of this large park. The fifth idea is, of course, along with the longitudinal, is the importance of transversal paths with a lot of small facilities linked to the neighborhoods, like civic facilities across, and connectivity across the highway with bridges and etc. The sixth one, as you can imagine, has to do with retrofitting electrical substations and facilities that become old or needs to be reorganized or displaced. So that what we tested in the power plant is to have a compact electrical substation, and instead of having this facility that's just a field of wire, you can have that compacted into a building and make that building more than one function to be clearly civic and be able to be nearby any housing or etc. So that is a place of opportunity for an electrical substation to be transformed. And that is this facility here that can be a hub, social hub. The seventh idea is the habitat recovery. So all this green belt will have different types of soils and different types of forests. So that is a work we do with all the teams together of this green belt to work on the type of ecosystems that will be recovered, that generates this patch of different ecosystems that are dependent on the level of floodability. And then the last idea, 8 of 8, is of course increasing floodability into the water to allow this landscape to recover by itself, which is these spaces of cohabitation between public space and the neighborhoods nearby with platforms, etc. And that linked to also facilities, architectural pieces that are new and connected with the city. So this then the ideas based on larger. The large project of this kind is somehow a project articulated with 8 ideas, as mentioned. It is also, of course, is a project of guerrilla. So that is this kind of philosophy of guerrilla, of a project that has several scales at the same time, from architectural scale to landscape scale to negotiating with neighborhoods. So it has all these things at the same time with a time frame that it's really about thinking what are the resources that will come in and what you can use that for. So it's just a guerrilla strategy. No? So the project keeps an eye on innovation, rethinking infrastructure, but we don't know when it's going to happen because, for example, the sewer treatment plants need to talk about with the Ministry of Environment, because that's not an obvious solution. It's not done. So we need to connect with the university in Wageningen and see, for example, if that is possible to push forward and how. So those are these kind of long processes of cutting the, for the politics to have a piece to cut or to inaugurate, but also at the same time have long-run projects that are on the back burner. So that's this kind of large-scale projects that have several scales. And then the last one is the one in Barcelona, which is the Green Diagonal Park, we call it. It's a project that was done in spring. A competition was won in 2011, and it's still not built, of course. So it's a linear park that is on top of high-speed infrastructure of Barcelona. Here you see the map of the city where the high-speed train infrastructure is coming from Madrid in this direction, and there's this sound station here. So the municipality and the regional government decided that instead of developing this new high-speed train station here, they would do it here and take the opportunity to redevelop this land that was an open trench of rail yards between populous working class neighborhood here onto the eastern side of the city. So taking the opportunity of the investment in infrastructure to redevelop land and build a piece of neighborhood. That's the last big project of the city of Barcelona. That's, as mentioned, 2011 to now, still going. And you see here other projects that the 92 Olympics were recovering this waterfront here. The 2004 Forum of Cultures was recovering this part here and the river. And then now it's the turn of the high-speed train infrastructure to mobilize capital to be reinvested into the city. So the agency, so that's a project for several government agencies that have this footprint into the neighborhoods that are San Andreu, San Martí, etc. And the project essentially is this. So what is going to be paid for is this. And for that piece, the proposal, our proposal that we did with West 8 and RCR in collaboration, is a project that has its first main idea to be building transversal axes, connecting existing infrastructures and civic centers across the old neighborhoods and having these connections of public spaces. But then the second main idea is to go beyond the plot, beyond the site of these 4 kilometers of linear park on top of a high-speed train, and to invent the story of a new narrative, which is this idea of the green diagonal of slow mobility that is an aim more than a project, that is pointing out towards the idea of connecting the city of Barcelona that has its city center here and all the grid, and then the different cities, neighborhoods around at the foothills of this Collserola mountain, to connect the city that is really dense connect the Mediterranean Sea with the Pyrenees Mountains up to the north with this green infrastructure of slow mobility. So that this is an existing park, there's an existing void, there's a series of small parks in between, but over time the idea is that they convince municipality and agent to create this path of slow mobility. This low mobility comes with the idea of the high-speed train infrastructure. So Barcelona is here, the train infrastructure, high-speed train connecting with the network, the European network is all here. So that slow mobility that connects the city of Barcelona with its territory is also an infrastructure of high-speed train that connects the country with the larger continent. So again, this slow mobility infrastructure that aims to connect the city with the territory. And it's an ambition that comes from a reading of the territory. So this line of this green diagonal is what you see here in blue, which is at the edge between the delta of the Besós River and the plain. So that blue line, it's also the place that is here connecting the Mediterranean Sea with the Pyrenees Mountains to the north. So this is the aim. And is a line that exists, that has always existed in the archaeology of the city. So it was, that line was a Roman aqueduct in red. It was later in the Middle Ages, it was a medieval Compton channel called, that's why we use this name again. And then it's now a contemporary Comtal route that is meant to connect with the territory. And as mentioned, is this Mediterranean Sea, the mountains, and this slow mobility infrastructure that connects the city with the territory, but it connects also with all the green parks of the metropolitan region and the region as a whole, and all the paths that these parks contain. So the idea is that you can take a horse or a donkey and go out your house, take the slow mobility path in the park, and go to the mountain with your donkey. And there is this idea of the Catalan donkey that is in extinction. And then the idea is to kind of, reuse this old way of moving through the territory with this slow mobility infrastructure. That is this transformation of a project that it was a forest in a roof, which is a project. So our project is only the park. It's the covering of the park, but the project is more complex than that. It has an urban development. It has infrastructure. It's also the place where the metro, the regional trains, and the high-speed train are passing underneath. It's a complex project of several agents, and we do the greening on top. That is the job. And this green park has three ideas. So the first one is, as mentioned, is this slow mobility with this radical pastoral idea of connecting the territory and the city through this slow mobility, which is this path design as a country-like park. The second idea is the forest, a multi-species forest that has species that are foreigners because they have to grow on top of a concrete slab with 5 feet. They're like, whatever you can survive here, it's not local, it's not typical, is what can survive in a polluted city, in a really heavy concrete surface, etc. So, but the main idea here is that this linear park is a threshold. Is a threshold of entrance towards the territory at large. So that is this forested. And this threshold has agoras in between, in the middle. So this is this idea of forest and threshold, forest and agora, that is on the shadowy part. The agoras some have flowers and some have grass or other things. And then the third idea is that of the fountain. So in the region as a whole, it's really typical to have natural springs in the mountains. So the springs have names. They have the spring of the bird, I don't know, uraneta, the pine fountain. No, they have names. So the territory is marked already by fountains that have names, and people know them and they go to. So it's a tradition of the relationship between people and territory. So we wanted to recreate that into the linear park, have fountains that are for drinking, of course, but fountains that are for seeing and fountains that are for gathering. So they have these different scales of fountains, and this is one of them, which is this floatable space that is a microtopography done with grasshopper that can be floated, and that is the sophistication of that is on top of an infrastructure of trains, so you cannot have water, so it can be registered and so those are the three ideas. Here's a plot which is the concrete slabs to be ready for building the park on top. So this idea of the green infrastructure is something that is present in the history of the city. So Ildefons Cerdà, which is the urbanist who designed the extension of the city from the old city to the new city, created this this green city that was having streets of 20 meters and 30 meters, but also big avenues that were of 50 meters or 150 feet wide that were supposed to connect the city with the world. That was he wrote in his general theory of urbanization in 1867. So we took that. His city was a green city you see in the left that was less dense, and this is how it ended up being. And that was how it was planned, with a green, quite a bit of greenery inside the city, but then it densifies and got somehow perverted. So, but we took this idea of these big avenues of 50 meters, 150 feet, to be the reference for this green infrastructure of slow mobility. And this, one of them was the Grand Via that was taken by Le Corbusier to do this connection with the city and the territory. So thinking about which, in each moment, there is like different obsessions by society. Le Corbusier took this green, this line of connecting the city with the territory with the idea of car and the idea of mobility of car and train and buses. So we take it similarly with the idea of slow mobility and green infrastructure connecting the city with the territory, in addition to the high-speed train. So it's this kind of, instead of the car of the modernity, we're kind of having the slow and the high-speed train together in this infrastructure. So that is the aim of that, to connect the city with that. So with that, we have seen these 5 projects that have hopefully some aspects of the project. The first one is cohabitation of architecture with floods. The second one, floodscapes, improving water quality in public space. Integration, cohabitation of different mobilities with the tramway. The obsession of transforming the sewer treatment plant into a spring or civic infrastructure. And then from urban park to slow mobility infrastructure at the territorial level. Those are somehow the ideas that are crossing from scale of architecture to the scale of the territory, without thinking that we have landscape architecture and urbanism, but we have pieces of architecture that are connected with the territory at large, and with this idea of the system thinking to try to find opportunities for improving the territory at any injection. So this is us, and that's it. Looking forward to questions. Thank you.
Can you hear me okay? Yeah. The green light is on. Oh, how about now? Great. Okay, I can hear myself. Margarita, thank you so much for sharing your practice with us and sharing those projects. I think it was a really amazing display of what can be done at such a large scale with design and thinking about architecture and landscape and urbanism. And I was wondering if you could maybe, I'll kick off with an initial question and then I'll hand it over to the attendees, but I was wondering if you could reflect on kind of the productive frictions that can be found in these projects, because we know that working at such a large scale, none of this is done alone, and none of this is done with the single hand of the architect or the designer or the landscape architect. There's so many people involved in this type of project. So could you reflect a little bit on the nature of collaboration, working at such a large scale, and the kind of complexity of some of these projects, and maybe some of the challenges, but also some of the sort of unique opportunities that emerge from such a large scale operation?
Yeah, I would say respond with two ideas or two obsessions we have. I think that we know the importance of narrative. The importance of narrative meaning the dream of the future and how it looks like. So I think narrative is something that puts together people on different disciplines. For example, this of the green diagonal is something that motivates a lot of people. In the case of the Zuera water park, the idea of a whole waterfront for people. So the narrative and the design narrative, it's a motivation. I think designers have the capacity to visualize future, as you know, and at any scales. And this is always a motivation that attracts different interests. So it's a magnet of different interests. There's a magnet. So that's first. And the second one, I think, is to keep the the spirit of generalist. I think specialist versus generalist is something that is always a tension. I think in my modest view, we have become really specialized on the production of the object in a very efficient way during the 20th century. And we've somehow, with this efficiency of production and the efficiency of construction and all that, we've lost somehow architects' capacity that existed in our discipline in the 19th century that was about being also a generalist. I think recovering the strength of a generalist is one of the key, I think, for moving forward. And the third one is to collaborate always, as mentioned before, with specialists that have the same self-critique capacity of like engineers that know that, you know, channeling rivers is not anymore the plan, or, you know, like people in energy that know that this cannot keep going this way, etc. So I think these three pieces are critical to move in this land, of designers.
Maybe we'll kick it off first with a student question. Any students have questions?
Thank you for your presentation, Margarita. This is very inspiring. You just mentioned this thing about architecture and its recent preoccupation with the specialization with the object. So I'm interested as a professor at Tulane, as an educator, when you're teaching students, how do you deal with this kind of specialization of the object bias that we can have in the projects? I mean, I'm new to architecture.
I think it's fundamental to have the two, no? So like really, because form beauty is like, it's a driver. So form making is fundamental, space making is fundamental, it's critical. So a specialist of form making it's the base. But then I think what we have at least is to try to educate our specialists in aiming to be also generalists, which means they have to forget about landscape architecture, engineering, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't exist out. You work on the territory with people who know more or less things about some things, plans and blah, blah, blah. But the idea of, I'm obsessed with the idea of architects having system thinking in their mindset, their toolkit. So we teach a core that is called site strategies that everyone passes through, and had hopefully a mindset that allowed them to at least see that, okay, I have to build this amazing thing, but maybe it's not here. So maybe this place that I'm given, it's not the place. So at least you can say no. You don't know what to do, but you know that here is not the place. So I think that is critically important for recovering this kind of large-scale thinking and understanding a little bit about the water cycle, understanding a little bit about the infrastructures and all these things that are part of the environment.
Thank you. I have another question, and this one is, you've shown us a lot of projects from Spain. So coming to New Orleans, what are some reflections you have that you can tell us more about in terms of what could work in New Orleans and what do you think just is unfeasible?
So the agents are totally different, as you can imagine. So it's not anymore municipalities, regional governments, etc. But the power of design is still there. So I think large-scale projects can be the catalyst of many different agents at different scales. So from nonprofits to public partnerships to different things. It takes more time, but I think leading the way with projects that are aiming to transform the territory, and then from that organizing the governance that it's needed to be done to make that happen. An example, so in New Delhi, my partner Iñaki Alday spent with Pankaj Virgupta quite a deal of years studying the relationship between Delhi and the Yamuna River. It is a mess, so it's a city of 20 million inhabitants, etc. And the point there was that the river is like a sewer, huge mess. And the study done with the students in research studios during 4 years ended up being presented in front of different agencies in the city that made them realize that they needed to reorganize the water governance in a way that allowed them to do something. So that was a first step that the project afforded. So it's not this project, this kind of research studio project, 3 years of studying the whole complexity of the river for nothing more at the moment than, oh, no, we kind of need to reorganize the agency of governance of water if we want to do something. You know? Then that is a rearrangement of the governance infrastructure to then be able to themselves organize competitions amongst locals to try to do these projects. But I think we need this capacity to visualize futures, to mobilize resources. So that is even more needed here than in places where these infrastructures are already in place. I always talk to my grad students and the students when you graduate, to organize in networks and to spend some time on nonprofit things doing these visualization scenarios. You know, that is what you think it needs to happen. You just have to take it in yourself and draw it and study it and then mobilize with that. Actually, the first project we did, this one of the Bullfight Arena, was that, because it was not a competition.
You were a student.
We were just graduating. I was saying, oh no, we have to say no to the first project and say, no, we're not going to build that.
Thanks for the presentation. One thing that struck me is your indication of the precipitation, the 1,600 roughly in New Orleans versus the 350 most, right, in Spain. And if I read that correctly. And so I wonder if you can maybe elaborate a little bit how the experience working in an environment of droughts informs your work and your experience in an environment of floods, both of them kind of conditions and results of global warming, just in a kind of drastically different direction.
Yeah. I put that of the millimeters always because it's almost a last name of cities to me. So it's like New Orleans, 1,500, Houston, 1,200, and Madrid is 640. So that idea of city millimeters, to me it's something that is fundamental to remember, that city is also its resources. So it's like the given resources of rain, and as an element to think about. And of course, it's critically important in places where rainfall is not really heavy. It's not really dry, but it's not enough for, so 600 millimeters is not bad, but of course in New Orleans, I haven't worked in a specific project, but I think to me, the number one wealth is water. It's going to be crisis globally, the issue of water. I mean, of course, it's polluted water in some cases, but the water as like sweet water is a super resource. And cities that have this amount of wealth, it seems to me incredible. So when I hear, oh, New Orleans is going to disappear, but it has a huge resource. It's a region that has rainfall like crazy. I don't know. To me, it's a resource question. And I haven't worked in projects in New Orleans yet. We do design project research studios of rainfall catching and things like that. But
I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. So I really appreciated your work with green spaces and how they filter water, they slowed it, or possibly made it more visible. I'm sure along the way you looked at existing green spaces around and you have so many more ideas of how they could be more efficient. I'm wondering if along the way you had any similar ideas developing about the building scale. Like how can built works be altered to be a part of this network, whether it's making water more visible or kind of adding to this water improvement
Yeah.
or green space type.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I was in Delft last week because they had like a conference on forest urbanism, this obsession about foresting cities. And there's this issue of where is water coming from? No? And it is this legal issues of gray water. Can gray water be reused in the city without moving that through the sewer treatment plant? So the building becomes this place of opportunity for catching vegetation with its own sweating water of like the waters of the building can be the base for feeding plants. So it's all about decreasing the microclimates, the extreme of microclimates in cities, so that there's a lot of buildings working on that line of greening roofs and streetscapes, reorganizing mobility to have more permeable ground to feed the soil and that type of thing. Heat island, yeah. We will see that.
Last question. Anyone?
Hi, I echo the thanks for the talk. It was really inspiring and quite innovative, I think. My question is directed at the first project, which I found really fascinating, about the bull ring. And it's a question of like the role of program, because I think all the projects balanced kind of this idea of restoration and pastoral with an idea of development, and it was kind of in the middle, where it was focused on like a highly designed landscape that could promote ecology but also human uses. And so I guess if you weren't approached with kind of this program of the bull ring, you kind of explained that your analysis of the water told you not exactly what to build, but what not to build. But in kind of that beginning stages of analysis, when you don't have a set goal
Yeah.
of what you want to build, how do you think your analysis tells you what the program
Where to
could
build,
be?
yeah. A good question. I guess, I mean, the analysis of a place has so many layers, no? I like to ask for the lines of desire of a society. Sometimes desires are, who knows, in this case it's bullfight, but there are desires in the territory that it's about listening to people and listening to the territory. The history of the territory often tells you what it was and what it has become and why it's frustrating now, how it has become. So then you can come back. And so it's a little bit of X-ray reading of territory to get to know which are the programs that can re-emerge or be inserted, or it's not an easy answer, but I think it has to do with the idea of generalist and being able to unveil what the territory can tell.
Okay. Well, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Join us in a round of applause for Margarita Jover.